And I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. Minister, we're very happy to see you in the President's chair. We also would like to greet the chairperson in office and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of North Macedonia, Mr. Buhar Osmani. Mr. President, I don't think anyone is going to be surprised if I start my statement by voicing the conclusion that the systematic and consistent actions by the United States and its allies over many years to create a Russophobic, nationalistic and neo-Nazi entity on our borders triggered a deep crisis in international relations. And Washington, London, Brussels can still continue their frenzied rhetoric about the allegedly unprovoked Russian aggression. The true reason for what we're witnessing today, the tectonic shifts we're witnessing today, are very clear to any reasonable observer. In addition to the anti-constitutional coup in Kiev in 2014 and the 8-year-long condoning of Kiev regime crimes against the people in south and east of Ukraine, this also includes the fact that the West abandoned the principle of indivisible security in favor of NATO expansion. The question of where we're going and what the new system of international relations, the new one, will look like is an open question today. The only thing is clear is that the world will no longer be a unipolar one, and the Western domination, the Pax Americana, are nearing their end. What remains open is the issue of the place and role of international organizations in this process, and each of such organizations is dealing with the challenge differently. The UN, which in its essence is a pillar of multilateralism, despite the fact that the Western prevalence in its structures and the Western attempts to impose Russophobic agenda on member states, still nonetheless remains a needed platform for dialogue and international cooperation. But the Council of Europe did not manage to withstand this onslaught and is nearing the status of a political non-entity. It became an appendix of NATO and EU, just simply rubber stamping their decisions. There have been many expectations in this regard also from the OSCE, their successor of the forum, which played a key role in establishing a dialogue between East and West during the Cold War. And today we have an excellent opportunity to analyze to what extent such expectations were justified. We are compelled to acknowledge that the OSCE, facing the challenges I just mentioned, is now undergoing the deepest crisis in its almost half-century existence. And this is compounded by the attempts of a group of member states to use the organization as their own instrument in the Western crusade against Russia. And this transformation, this change did not take place overnight. The system of regional security built within the OSCE and based on the principle of indivisible security from Vancouver to Vladivostok was truly unique in nature. The OSCE managed to successfully meet the challenges of its time, and the efforts made by good faith participants of the process allowed to reach agreements on any urgent matters. Very good example here is the signing in 1999 of Istanbul of a number of important documents, such as the European Security Charter, the adopted Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, which is a fundamental instrument ensuring European security and predictability in the military area. But the desire to strengthen security was not shared by one and all. As is well known, the United States wanted to keep NATO dominant on the basis of the earlier version of CFE. They disallowed its allies to ratify the adapted version of the CFE treaty. And the next steps by the Washington withdrawal from the ABM treaty, from the INF treaty, the destruction of the Open Skies Treaty with the forbearance of European countries led to even greater erosion of the global and regional security. But even against the background of the attempts to turn the organization into a body to oversee the policy of states east of Vienna, the OSCE remained needed. People thought that they would help improve the situation in Europe and to transit to cooperation and development. Its mediation potential was also needed. OSCE was called upon to play an important role in implementing the Minsk agreements between Ukraine and the republics in Donbass, against whose people people, the Kiev regime started a bloody war in 2014. For that reason, under the OSCE aegis, there was an array of instruments created, and these instruments provide parties to the conflict a platform for a direct dialogue within the contact group and its subgroups. But Kiev systematically avoided from having substantive dialogue with a representative of the DPR and LPR. They continued shelling their cities. And in this, they were helped by the NATO countries who invested in weapons and materiel to the Kiev regime and who encouraged Ukrainian crimes against peaceful people. The reaction to that by the OSCE leadership frequently gave rise to even greater number of questions or even was absent. The organization at the end did not manage to accomplish its main task, achieving peace on the base of the Minsk agreements. It basically, worse than that, became an accomplice of the Western line, not just doing the bidding of one side of the conflict, but also providing it with sensitive information. It is not surprised, therefore, that after the worsening of the Ukrainian crisis in February last year, the organization unconditionally took the side of Kiev and implemented the task of serving the interests of some member states of the OSCE and alliances. All of its work was put in the service of pushing the Western approaches forward in Ukraine and around it. The instructions of OSCE to publicly only act under the consensus position was forgotten. As a result, it became a tribune for Russophobic invective and accusations against our country. The Ukrainization, which the last year Polish chairmanship was particularly successful in, resulted in the fact that the mandate of the organization is not implemented and its experience and competency is not being used, creating an artificial tension about Ukrainian problems is at the expense of other crises which the OSCE countries have. The situation in the Balkans is deteriorated. We're increasingly concerned by the worsening situation in Kosovo because of the Pristina authorities and with full connivance of Western sponsors. Against this background, we see that there's a lack of a balanced reaction to this from OSCE, despite the fact that this organization remains part of international efforts for the resolution of the conflict in line of the Security Council Resolution 1244. We have to acknowledge also that there is a lack of progress within the OSCE when it comes to the Transnistrian settlement, in particular the 5+2 format, which has been put on pause since October 2019. As is well known, the mandate of the mission in the Republic of Moldova was issued 30 years ago. This turned out to be insufficiently long to provide member states with tangible results. We are particularly concerned by the disruptive role in Transnistria played by Ukraine. They demonstrate that they are ready to interfere, including using force. We regret the politicization of the Geneva international discussions on security and stability in the Caucasus. This resulted in the unaccountable cancellation of 2 meetings and undermining the pace of negotiations. We think that this is a desire of our Western colleagues to spread the confrontation from Ukraine to also Southern Caucasus and sacrifice the Geneva format to geopolitics. This requires a swift reaction from the co-chairmanship of the UN, OSCE, and EU. We reconfirm our commitment to the Geneva international discussions. It's a unique platform for a direct dialogue between Tbilisi and Sukhumi at Khinvali. The alternative to negotiations is a deteriorating situation on the ground. Because of the US and France, the Minsk OSCE group stopped functioning. At the same time, the situation around Nagorno-Karabakh, including in the area under responsibility of the Russian peacekeeping contingent and on the contact line, and in the dialogue between Baku and Yerevan, continues giving rise to serious concern. We reiterate the importance of strictly abiding by all of the agreements reached by the leaders of Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan in 2020-2022 on how to normalize the relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The Russian side stands ready to extend all necessary assistance to Armenia and Azerbaijan, both politically and on the ground, with the participation of the command of the Russian peacekeeping contingent. Unfortunately, the current North Macedonia chairmanship of OSCE has not so far managed to create a unifying agenda and cannot afford to be status neutral. The Minister of Foreign Affairs for North Macedonia did not show way from participating in a political show on the anniversary of the stage events in Bucha, and he thus violated the mandate of the chairman in office of the OSCE. At the same time, the Secretariat of the organization is silent on the political persecution of the Kiev regime against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, as they were silent when it came to the outrages by the Maidan authorities and the crimes, such crimes of Ukrainian nationalists as burning people alive in Odessa in the trade union house, which took place 9 years ago. The tragedy is repeating itself today, and the pressure of Ukrainian special services and institutions on the church interference in the freedom of religion is not being evaluated or assessed at all, despite the fact that these are violations by Ukraine on international legal commitments, including those which were undertaken within the OSCE. We demand that the current chairmanship undertake real action to protect the freedom of religion in Ukraine in line with the principles and commitments of the OSCE. Mr. President, the short-sighted confrontational policy of the Western alliance of states led by the United States not only triggers a deep crisis in the OSCE area, but basically puts the organization itself in front of a momentous choice. It either has to deal with the all-important issue of creating European architecture on the basis of indivisibility, which we have in many OSCE documentations, including the Istanbul Charter of 1999, the Astana Declaration of 2010, or it is going to continue to do the bidding of Western states who understand, under the word security, the limitless expansion of NATO and constantly imposing Western political, economic, and human rights notions. Nonetheless, we continue believing in the OSCE potential and continue attempts at dialogue through Vienna. It is enough to attend the meetings of the Permanent Council to see the difference between the hysteric, offensive statements by Western delegations and the poised, facts-based reports of our Vienna colleagues. We will continue conveying calmly information about the real situation. As the saying goes, those with ears, let them hear. The OSCE still has a chance to bring closer together sometimes polarized viewpoints and working out a platform for dialogue and peaceful coexistence, as was done some time ago by the Soviet American European negotiators in the early mid-1970s. Well, all is needed here to stop demonizing your opponent and also give up on the logic of confrontation as zero-sum game. As regards the topic of our meeting today, the interaction between the two organizations under Chapter 8 of the Charter, we're convinced that this needs to take place transparently and be accountable to member states and serve the goal of creating a unifying stance instead of becoming confrontational. We'd like to recall here, nonetheless, that the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security is borne by the Security Council of the United Nations. It looks as though some people in Vienna have forgotten about that. They've become too involved in anti-Russia project. And the sooner the OSCE returns to a much-needed calm and mutually respectful dialogue, the greater the chance it has to fit into the new world order. And we would like to think that those in and around Vienna fully recognize this. I thank you.